time, their body never to be found again, and closure and elusive dream for their family and everybody who knew them? I have. I was born and raised in Mexico, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about the dangers of normalizing violence. I was about 13 years old one night, sitting with my best friend, at a park bench, and we were chatting away like teenage girls do, when suddenly, as if in this strange choreography, every single street light went down. And before we could even look at each other and figure out what the heck was going on, cop cars flooding our street. Their lights are going, we can hear their boots hitting the pavement, they're running, and we bolted. We ran to my house and we locked ourselves in because we knew better than to stick around and figure out what the heck was going on. The news came out shortly after. The reason they were there that night was to apprehend one of our neighbors, who was found to be the leader of the band of abductors. Horrible people doing unspeakable things to others for money. And I remember the conversations that ensued when these news came out. Everybody in our neighborhood, everybody in our street, so shocked. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, but we've known them for so long. How could this be right under our noses all these years? We've played with our kids, we didn't know. But slowly, from shock, those conversations changed and they morphed into something else. And it became a dialogue that is very familiar to any of us who have grown in that kind of environment. Those dialogues morphed into, oh well, we know this is how it is here, isn't it? We never really know who we're spending time with or sharing space with. Good old Mexico, you never know. Normalizing violence. Perhaps an example that it's easier for us here in Canada to relate to is seeing what is happening right now south of the border with the people in the US. We see their kids coming back to school wearing bulletproof backpacks. And we're able to see that and recognize it for what it is, and we're shocked. We're like, oh my gosh, how is this even happening? But then all it takes is listening to the dialogues of those who are in that environment. And what do we hear? We hear, oh well, this is what we got to do now in these difficult times. This is how we go about things. Normalization of violence. We hear about babies being kept in cages away from their families. We hear about asylum seekers being denied help even though they're fleeing conflict or even natural disasters. And in Canada, we sit here and we're shocked, as we should be. But what do we hear from them? Justifications in the shape of, oh well, if they had only gone about immigration the right way, they wouldn't be in this mess, right? Justification of violence. Now, Mexico and the US didn't get to the point that they are right now overnight. It didn't happen in the blink of an eye. It didn't happen with fairy dust powder. It has been years, decades of systematic abuses and problems that have escalated. But the real big problem is that the people who are involved in it have allowed themselves to just become familiar enough with the situations happening. They are no longer trying to resist it. They are merely trying to survive. And I can relate, because when you live in that world, that's all you have left. And when you come out of that world, it takes years of your life trying to put the pieces back together and trying to realize that the things that you experienced are not normal and they're not okay. I was 16 years old when a good friend of mine died by suicide. He hung himself. What I did not tell anybody at the time was when he confided in me. He told me about his need for connection and how it drove him to the worst people in the worst circumstances. He told me about the things that he was forced to do. He told me about the bodies that he buried in the ground. He also told me about the nightmares that followed after. I was 16 at the time. I didn't know how to help him. There was no talk back then about mental health or seeking therapists or anything like that. And to make things more complex, there was a deep stigma, and still is a deep stigma, for people who, for whatever reason, end up in those kind of life circumstances involved with those kind of very dangerous people. Well, he asked for it. I mean, what was he expecting, right? Like he got what was coming to him. Normalization of violence. I can look at this audience right now, and I see your faces, and I know that you're hearing me, and I know that you're connecting with what I'm saying, and I know that you feel my words, and I know that you feel for him because ultimately he paid for it with his life. But what happens when we step out of here and we look at our very own addicted and struggling in our downtown and we roll our eyes and we just kind of wish they would go away because why can't they get their shit together? It's so easy, right? So easy to otherize them. And yet what would they tell us about the nightmares that followed them? The problems are complex. There is poverty, there is inequality, there is violence against women. There is entire systems that have lasted for decades, centuries, in place that have created the massive problems that we have right now. And when we focus on the problems, it's almost difficult to breathe because it feels like, what can I ever do to ever impact the massive amount of issues that we have going on right now? So I don't want you to focus on any of that. We're gonna focus on what we can do and what I'm putting on you that we're gonna fucking do because we have no choice. The alternative, it's like I want you to think of me like I'm coming to you from the future. I have seen what happens when we allow for corruption, for inequality, for poverty, for addiction, for mental health, for all these issues to grow and become stronger. I come from that. You don't want that. And I don't want that, and I'm not going to allow that to happen here. And you're in it with me. Sorry. Recently, there was an entire operation that happened in our city in which 42 Mexican workers were rescued from modern-day slavery conditions. I don't know the details of exactly what their life was like while they were being trafficked in those months when they were kept in inhumane conditions. But I have often wondered, because they were still working in resorts, in hotels, so I have often wondered, did any client ever pick up that anything was wrong with one of them? Did anyone ever take the time to look at them in the eye and, get a glimpse into like, whoa, something's not right here? I hope that happened because it breaks my heart to think that we are so disconnected from one another that we can't even see the pain in another person's eyes. All it takes for you is to go to one of our local policemen and ask them how common is sex trafficking in our region. They can give you stories. It's so common. It's so common. And I want to ask you today, I want you to reflect back on your everyday life. How many times have you and I crossed paths with a woman or a girl who has been trafficked for sex? And because we are failing to even look at other humans in the eye, we didn't even clue in, and we missed a chance to save a life. How many more chances are we going to miss? Are we going to change it finally? I hope we do. Now again, poverty, inequality, discrimination, racism, violence against women, these are all the dreaded ingredients, and they already exist here where we live. And it is up to us to regain a sense of humanity and preventing them from growing into anything worse. It's overwhelming, isn't it? Like we hear about, I'm telling you about all these big issues. And like I said, they've been in place for decades and so many people, and it's everyone's responsibility, and it's just so much to take. I don't want you overwhelmed tonight. I don't want to leave you with a sense of dread of the world coming down on you. All the opposite. The antidote to despair is action. And so I'm going to give you action that we can effectively start taking today. Now, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care what you've done in your past. I don't care who you're related to or what. Nothing matters. What I can tell you right now is that I know for a fact every single one of you here has kindness to some degree or another. And so what is preventing you from using that kindness in every single interaction that you have with another human being? Because here's the thing, our world is starved for connection. When we see people doing terrible things, lack of connection. When we see disengagement, and when we see school shooters, and when we see addiction, and when we see so many other problems that I have touched on tonight, lack of connection. And so what can we do right now as responsible human beings in it together for the rest of the world, because we're all in this together? We start connecting, and we start connecting, and we start talking about community, but we can't have connection and community until we have kindness. That is the basic framework of everything that we do. Can you imagine what life would be like if every single interaction that you have with another person is based off of kindness? What would that look like? When you're willing to look people in the eye and have conversations with them, you're no longer scared of anybody else, you just have kindness. Now mind you, this doesn't mean that you stop fighting for the things that you believe are right. This doesn't mean that you stop advocating or being loud or giving feedback or confronting the people that need confronting. You still do that, but you do that with a basis of kindness in your heart. What would our world look like then? And I want you to know that tonight I am leaving this stage so freaking eager and excited to learn what your style of kindness is going to look like from now on. Thank you.